As rescue efforts continue in the earthquake-affected areas of Burma's Shan state, images of devastation continue to flow out of the country. In the last few weeks, footage of the damage caused by a 6.8 magnitude earthquake that killed almost 150 people in Burma and left 3,000 homeless has sparked international interest. But at the other end of the country, news of another natural disaster has barely reached the very shoreline it affected. Up to 600 fishermen are still missing after a heavy storm just off the Irrawaddy coastline. More than 12,000 fishermen were said to have been stranded after they were forced to set themselves adrift on rickety boats known as tiger barges as the storm raged. But getting information from the region has proved problematic. Burma's own state media did not mention the disaster until 8 days after the storm first struck, when thousands were still lost at sea. Without any form of reliable domestic news to fall back on, and in a region where foreign journalists have little to no access, the only images coming out of the area were shot on low-quality hidden cameras by exiled media.
2011ခုနှစ်မတ်လ23ရက်ည7:30မိနစ်30လောက်မှာကော့တောင်မြို့ကိုအေယာဝတီတိုက်တွင်းမှာလေဘေးတင်ကြောက်ဖောက်လုသမားများဆက်ရောက်လာတဲ့တနေ့ဖြစ်ပါတယ်။ယခုဆက်ရောက်လာတဲ့လူဦးရေကတော့88ယောက်ဖြစ်ပြီးကော့တောင်မြို့ကိုစုစုပေါင်းရောက်ရှိလာတဲ့လူဦးရေကတော့308ယောက်ရှိတော့ပါပြီဖြစ်ပါတယ်ခင်ဗျာ
This covert reporting, combined with dispersed rescue efforts, means finding reliable information was difficult. With no official information being released, even the people who had been there found it difficult to know how many had been affected. Many eyewitnesses were too afraid to speak on camera, and when they did agree to comment, reporters found widely contrasting accounts of what had happened. After a rescue effort by the Burmese Navy, 12,000 people have reportedly been brought to safety. But with 600 people still missing almost 3 weeks after the storm, it's feared there may be no more survivors. Further north, the death toll from the earthquake, although smaller, is just as shocking. But in contrast, and gratifyingly for the media, it had images and information to go with it. Just days after the news of the storm, victims had begun to emerge, but the media's attention was dominated by events unfolding in Shan state. Burma, closed off and secretive, is rarely covered extensively by the international news. But an earthquake, with dramatic and often terrifying images and stories of horror, is the staple diet of television news. This is not the first time that a disaster in Burma's south has been overshadowed by an earthquake. In 2008, shortly after Cyclone Nargis, Burma's worst recorded natural disaster, news of the storm was pushed aside by the Sichuan earthquake in China, where less than half the number of people were affected. The proximity of Burma's quake to Thailand and China also sparked interest. Thailand is a popular tourist destination and receives regular international coverage. Despite the epicenter being more than 100 kilometres inside the Burmese border, headlines such as "Earthquake near Thailand" and "Earthquake hits Thailand" were popular in the press. And almost immediately, Thai news services were broadcasting images of the disaster, making footage immediately accessible. This coverage, along with the accessibility of the region, seems also to have affected the aid response. Support has been delivered to the border with unusual efficiency, and the continuing aid effort is keeping the story in the media. Natural disasters always have an appeal for television news. The dramatic pictures, the high death tolls, and the stories of human suffering fascinate audiences around the world. But getting images out of Burma is often at best slow and at worst impossible. The proximity of the earthquake to Thailand has given this disaster an unusual accessibility, and the people of Burma a unique opportunity to have their problems heard. But television news is fickle. Often criticised as a mixture between journalism and entertainment, a story won't get covered if it doesn't have an appeal. And with no shocking images and unreliable information, the story of the fishermen caught in the storm doesn't make the cut, despite the number of people affected.